The Gators finally got back into the win column on Saturday evening with a 49-7 victory over McNeese to end a four-game losing streak dating back to last season. And they did so in a fashion that they needed to. Established identity, controlled the controllables, and found success in the areas they previously struggled against Utah in week one. I'll talk about all that and more in today's recap of the game. Welcome back into another episode of Carroll's Cadence. I'm your host, Brandon Carroll. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and then sit back and enjoy the show. Florida's bout versus McNeese on Saturday night went the way many people expected it to when Florida hosts an FCS opponent inside the swamp. It gave the team an opportunity to reconcile some of the missteps it saw that were present during that Utah loss, and it gave them a chance to post a tally in the win column for the first time since a 38-6 victory over South Carolina inside the swamp in week 11 of last season. And so you look at this game, and there were two things that Billy Napier really stressed going into it: fundamental improvement in the rushing offense. The procedural errors that Florida struggled with against Utah, the false starts, the illegal formations, the just things that were in their control that they beat themselves on. Billy Napier wanted to fix that. And then the rushing offense, obviously only churning out 13 yards total against Utah, wasn't a point of emphasis because that's their identity offensively. Well, the emphasis, at least in this game, it worked on both fronts. Firstly, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. No matter who the opponent is, it's always important to control what you can control. And that will translate against a McNeese State or against any other team in the country, because controlling what you can control applies in football. It applies in other professions. It applies in life. All right. There's always going to be junk that's thrown at you and beyond your control, but addressing the things that we can affect, the things that we can dictate, that helps ease the burden of those extenuating circumstances that we often struggle with. And that was really the message from Billy Napier and his staff to the Gators this week against the FCS opponent. They stood up and said, all right, let's not take this opportunity for granted. I know we want to get out here, we want to get a win, but it's also important that we take care of what we can take care of, and the rest will fall in place. We listen to the snap count and make sure we're not getting off the ball early to potentially force the team back into a 3rd and 15 or go from a 3rd and 1 to a 3rd and 6. Obviously, it's McNeese, but it's something that translates from game to game. And so during his post-game press conference on Saturday, he kind of confirmed that was an emphasis for his team against McNeese, against the Cowboys. He said, yeah, I think it was a point of emphasis. Reality is, as a coach and really as a competitor, and each individual player that plays in the game, you can live with some things. Guy beats you, you run into a really good player, maybe he wins a matchup, but ultimately the things that have nothing to do with the opponent are the ones that keep you up at night. Certainly, we had too many of those last week. It came down to playing clean, efficient, purposeful football. The rest will take care of itself. Well, Florida got the opportunity for really a week of practice to address those procedural errors, those coaching lapses, the self-inflicted wounds that hurt them in a week 1 loss to Utah, and it paid dividends. You don't usually get that once the season starts, but because of Florida going from a Utah, which was a top 15 team nationally, to a McNeese State, you had the opportunity to do that, and like I said, it paid dividends. So he continued and said, to come back and play cleaner, I think it was a positive. But we all understand we have to continue to improve, to evolve, and bigger challenges are coming. Florida ended this contest with just 4 penalties for 20 yards. Only one came in the first half with the full starting unit in, and it was on right after Graham Mertz's 1-yard QB sneak touchdown. Austin Barber was called for an unnecessary roughness, and then that was offset on the PAT by McNeese, who was called for unsportsmanlike conduct. You had 2 false starts with the backup units and an ineligible man downfield because Hayden Hansen was covered up on the line of scrimmage on one of the plays late in the game. On their I think it was the second drive that stalled for Florida in this contest. One of few. There was really 2 drives that stalled for Florida throughout the night. They were 7 for 7 on their first 7 attempts and scoring touchdowns on each drive. And then you obviously there was a special teams blunder at the start with the botched snap, and but it was fine after the rest of the day. And I'll just leave it that at that. We can revisit if necessary next week, but really everything that they tried to do, they did. They generated the cleaner outing that they were looking for procedurally. And it doesn't matter, like I said earlier, if it's McNeese, because it's one of the few aspects of football that is equally positive against frickin' any FCS opponent that you play or the number one team in the country. It's no different if you're playing McNeese or if you're playing Georgia. If you can control what you can control, sure. The difference is in week 1, they were on the road. In week 2, they were at home. It's going to be something that they're going to have to deal with when they go to Kentucky in week 5. But for now, it looks as if they took care of what they could take care of, and that's all that you can do, especially against an opponent that allows you to focus on those things at such a high rate that you wouldn't be able to. Now they're not going to be able to going into week 3 against Tennessee. And then there was Florida's ability to run the football. We know Florida wants to run the football. And while it's not the equally transferable aspect like the procedural kind of areas of the unit, they did what they needed to do. Because while it might not show up in the same regard on the stat sheet, Florida's ground attack on Saturday meant something. We saw a direct example of what the University of Florida's identity during the 2023 season should be, or what they want it to be. They came out, established the run early, and rode the success of that early rushing game throughout the entirety of the contest. They finished with 327 yards on the ground combined over 51 attempts. The trio of ball carriers were force-fed into being productive as each earned double-digit attempts. We saw Montreal Johnson go for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns on 15 carries. Trevor Etienne got 84 yards and a score on 11 carries. Trayon Webb produced to get 14 carries, 71 yards, and 2 scores of his own. And they each looked like they were performing at the rate that is expected of them this year. Yes, there is still a desire to see it against a formidable opponent, but it has to start somewhere. And Florida ran the football down the Cowboys' throats. And that's what they're going to try to do to any team that they see this year. They're going to try to run the football down their. Montreal Johnson served as the bell cow that many people expected him to in this season. Trevor Etienne obviously got a bulk of the carries in relief of him, but they're a tandem. They're going to have times where Montreal Johnson's the leading ball carrier, Trevor Etienne's the leading ball carrier. The starter in this regard is not what it is on other teams. Starting in the Florida backfield is going to be, as long as Billy Napier's head coach, it's not going to mean much because you can get starting reps even if you're the third string running back. And we saw that from Trayon Webb, who, by the way, Trayon Webb kind of asserted himself as a legitimate tertiary option in this backfield. He fits nicely as a power back. Has a physical downhill rushing style that is closely mirrored to Montreal Johnson, even though Montreal Johnson attempts more to kind of bounce outside where Trayon Webb would just try to run through you. He's not as explosive on a carry-to-carry basis as a result, but he could be a dangerous short area rusher that gives this team that extra running back that we know they want. Billy Napier honestly wants 4 running backs. We saw that when they brought in Cam Carroll before his injury, really right before the season started. They were going to use all 4 of them. It wasn't just going to be the 3 with Carroll and then Trayon Webb was going to be an odd man out. No, he was still going to get a split of the carries. It just wasn't going to be as high of a volume because they'd have to split with Carroll as well. But now you're looking at a trio that can all get it done. They're looking at a trio that each have a niche in this backfield. And like I said earlier, the volume in which Florida ran the football is indicative of a best-case scenario approach for this offense. But in this one, the opponent had a lot to do with that. They ran the ball at a 70% clip against the Cowboys. That won't happen in SEC play, but I expect them to come close to that 60% mark, as close to it as they can, given last year's split of 57-43 and the 56-44 split of Napier's offense when he was at Louisiana Lafayette. Florida found its legs on the ground. Literally. That's the biggest takeaway you can have from this contest is they found its legs. At least, at the very least, it's a performance that instilled confidence in the ball carriers, and it also instilled confidence in the offensive line that there is a path to performing and to kind of springing open some big plays on the ground, or just being consistent on the ground. They had another opportunity to perform alongside each other. They got to see what success was like after seeing so much change to the first team unit during camp due to injury. Obviously, Kingsley Agwakin's still on the shelf at this time with a high ankle sprain, but there's internal optimism that he'll be ready to return in week 3 against Tennessee. And his experience from the center spot is expected to kind of aid that unit to take another step forward. Obviously, they're going to be doing it against a better defensive line, a Tennessee defensive line that's even taken steps this season compared to last season. But his experience there and then the continuity of the other spots is important for the growth of this unit. And they got to see some of that. They got to see, how can we work with each other in this contest and, in this season in week 2 after a sluggish week 1 outing. And so now Florida gets another chance to test its fortitude against Tennessee, against a defensive line that looks much improved from last season, from what I saw from them in week 1, albeit against a pretty bad Virginia team. I think that there's a lot of positives you can take away from Florida's rushing game in this one. Not necessarily the statistics, just the fact that they got it going, the fact that they leaned on it, and the fact that it was their identity. They established the offensive identity in this contest, because that's going to be important from now until the year is over. They have to have an identity. They can't get forced into doing what they did against Utah, where they have to throw the football 45 times. That's not going to be Florida's recipe for success. Recipe for success is finding a way to run the football 51 times like they did against McNeese. Because if they're running the football 51 times, that means they're doing something right. That means they're controlling the clock, and that means they're having success on the ground because they keep going to it. So Florida's going to want to see that from now until the year is over. And then you flip to the other side of the football with Austin Armstrong's unit, and that the defense remains stout. In week 1, the second half, Florida really pitched a shutout defensively. Sure, you had the early score off the interception deep in Florida territory, and they were able to punch it in a few plays later as Bryson Barnes kind of skirted off to the opposite corner. All right, he found the front corner of the end zone, squeezed in, and boom, that was Utah's last score of the game early in the third quarter. Kind of put the game out of reach, and that was all she wrote. But Florida's defense looked much better in that second half, and I think that carried into this game, at least in a regard of just finding success in the process, finding success in the scheme. Because heading into this week, they knew that they were going to likely find, to maintain that success, because I know I keep harping on it because I don't want people to think that I'm getting in here and hyping up Florida, because I do think that there are still glaring issues that will need to be fixed in week 3, week 4, week 5, heading it throughout the rest of the season. But it's important to also understand that this game against McNeese isn't just a wash. It served a purpose. And in this one, it was producing some of the tangible results that the pass rush unit wanted to see. They had 0 sacks in week 1. The struggled to get after Bryson Barnes. Obviously, Utah's an offense that gets the ball out of his hands quickly. But even when they're not getting out of his hands quickly, even when it's taking time for him to load up, Florida wasn't able to get to him. But in week 2, they were able to get to Nate Glantz. They were able to get past that Cowboys front and find success, kind of wreaking havoc in that backfield. They had 2 sacks, 5 tackles for loss, and it just showed that they continue to find success relative to what they've seen since 2020, because this unit has not been good. This unit's been one of the worst in college football since 2020. But now you're starting to see them take those steps, take those strides in the right direction in a game like this, where you have the opportunity to see, to kind of find yourself getting that quarterback on the ground. That is a step in the right direction. That is a confidence builder. And that's really what a game against an FCS opponent is supposed to be. Sure, it's a win. Everyone knows it's going to be a win. It should be a win. If it's not a win by the 49-7 margin, it's a concern. But there's aspects of play that you can also take away from these contests that are just as important as the tally in the win column, if not more important. And finding a way to get the quarterback on the ground, a rushing quarterback on the ground, I might add, which I'll talk about here in a second. The impressive strides Florida has been able to make defensively through 2 games is starting to kind of shine as, okay, this could be not just a place where Florida is not concerned, but this could be a strength of this Florida team in 2023. And a major reason for those strides, for those steps forward, in my opinion, is the linebacker core. I think specifically, you look at Shamar James and Scooby Williams, and those two have been astronomical for Florida's success defensively. Obviously, Shamar James had 6 tackles and a half a tackle for loss on Saturday. He kind of led Florida once again in that area in tackles for the second straight game. He's continuing to prove that he's the best player on Florida's defense. I contested in the offseason that Jason Marshall Jr. could give him a bit of run for his money there, but it hasn't been close. Shamar James is the best player on this Florida defense, and it's not even a question. Then you look at Scooby Williams, 3 tackles, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss. They're looking good. This Florida linebacker core is arguably one of the better ones they've had in a while. And that's no slight to Ventrell Miller and Amari Burney, but just the multifaceted skill sets that this linebacker core has, the depth that it is that's emerged out of nowhere after being potentially a concern this offseason. It's looking good. And Florida's had some great linebacker cores throughout its history, but it's been a while since a team has had this speed and pursuit from the second level of a Gators defense. Since the speed and pursuit has been this high for a Gators team as it is this year. And it's evident through 2 weeks. It's evident. Because now it looks like Shamar James, who, like I said, is the best player on that defense, has his partner in that second linebacker spot in Scooby Williams. Because you look at Scooby through 2 games this year compared to what he did last year, and his progression mentally from last year to this year is astronomical. The progression from the USF game last year, where he really struggled diagnosing and filling run gaps, kind of being kind of finding his run fits on the defensive line or through the offense line of scrimmage. Astronomical. His ability to diagnose plays through 2 appearances has been fantastic. It feels like that USF game, like that I mentioned, where Ventrell Miller was out and they filled it with Scooby Williams and USF ran all over him. It feels like that was forever ago. The off-ball linebacker role for Scooby has clicked. He has found it has, boom. He's figured it out. And it's showing in the way that he's flying around the field. He understands his job, his responsibilities, what he needs to do in order to have success. And it's giving him the ability to not just think, because he already knows. Ball snaps, you diagnose, boom, go get it. And that it's clicked. And now you're seeing that click allow him to be a just dynamic linebacker. He's quick. He can move sideline to sideline. He can just get after ball carriers in a hurry. And Florida hasn't had that in a while. And if they have, it's only been one of the linebackers. They got 2 that can do it. And you're starting to see that because it's clicked, the staff is starting to show comfort in utilizing him in his versatility. They praised him for his versatility this offseason. They said, yeah, we're going to use him in a ton of different ways. But obviously, they wanted to see it. They wanted to see it outside of a practice setting. Can he put what he's been doing in practice, the development that we've seen from him, can he take it and do it at a rate that suggests we can move him around and he can be a Swiss Army knife for our defense? He's proven that through 2 weeks. And as a result, there's times where Florida's going a traditional 3-4 look where you get 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers, including that jack edge rusher spot, usually occupied by Princely Amon-Mielen, also having TJ Searcy there a little bit. And you'll take Scooby Williams, move him up, bring on Derek Wingo to pair with Shamar James, and you're getting Scooby Williams coming off the edge as an extra edge rusher in a variant creeper defense look that maintains 4 rushers but puts extra stress on opposing offensive lines because of the added speed working off the edge, because of the off-ball linebacker that's usually would be coming off a blitz, off of pressure, but no, he's just lined up ready to rock. Simply put, this entire defense is being put in situations to win. They're having an effective use of getting towards the quarterback. Scooby Williams was also used as a QB spy for most of the night against Nate Glantz. And if you didn't watch Nate Glantz or this McNeese team before Florida, you wouldn't have known that he's actually the strength of his game is actually him as a rusher. He's a very talented rusher. But you wouldn't know that because Florida said, all right, we're sticking on him. We're going to put a QB spy on him. We're going to go get him. Scooby Williams, his first, the first sack of Florida's season, the first opportunity for Florida to get after the quarterback and bring him down to the ground was Scooby Williams working from his quarterback spy position, roaming in the middle of the field and closing in on Glantz and forcing him down to the ground. So everything's really starting to come together. That aspect of him being able to run the football completely eliminated because Florida used the spy. And whether it was Williams, who was the main piece in that spy look, or Shamar James, they had that man in prison behind the line of scrimmage. He didn't move at all. I even thought there would be once or twice where he was able to break out, but it may be McNeese, but Austin Armstrong schemed up a perfect game plan for that. And unlike in years past, this unit is executing. They're making tackles on first attempts. They're forcing offenses off the field on third downs. They're flocking to ball carriers. The defense is trending up in Gainesville, and it's looking very, very good. And I know there's a lot of positives that you can take away when it's an FCS opponent. There are things that you want to see against a Tennessee, against what you wanted to see against Utah for this team. But a lot of the things that the defense did really just carried over from last week. If you're concerned, the procedural errors on the road, sure, should still be a concern. The rushing attack should still be a concern. We haven't seen it against an SEC opponent, against a Power 5 team. The defense should not be a concern. Pass rush, all right, we can have a conversation. Can they get after the passer at a consistent rate? 2 sacks is whatever, but Tarleton State had 5 or 6 against McNeese a week ago. Okay, we can have a conversation about the pass rush. But overall, this defense is, from a scheme standpoint, from an execution standpoint, from a progressional standpoint from last season to this year, they are drastically improved. They're averaging 4.5 missed tackles per game after averaging close to 10, I believe, last year, if not more, per game. And then they had 19 total missed tackles last year through 2 games. They have 9 currently, so 10 less missed tackles. They're getting opposing teams off the field on third downs at a higher rate than they have in forever. They're group tackling. They're flying to the football. The linebackers are very talented. Secondary's holding up well. There's a big test coming up with Tennessee. There is. And that's when you really find out, is this Florida defense improved? Is this Florida defense more than improved? Have they gone from being one of the worst units in college football to actually being a strength of this team in 2023? If I had to put it on a paper right now, I'd say yes. Because from what I've seen structurally, schematic-wise, execution-wise, they look so much better than they have in years past. They look like they understand what's going on, what they need to accomplish, and where to be at all times. Thank you for watching another edition of Carroll's Cadence. Make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. I'll be back on Wednesday with special guest Evan Kroll from Sports Illustrated Fan Nation's Vol Country to discuss the 11th ranked Tennessee Volunteers ahead of their trip to the Swamp in Week 3. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss out on that or any other hot content being pumped out here on the channel. Everyone have a great start to your week. I'm Brandon Carroll, signing off from Carroll's Cadence.